In early 1969, the dense jungles of Vietnam trembled under the dominion of the AC-47 gunship, affectionately known as Puff the Magic Dragon. Its aged engines roared like a living beast of the air, while its trio of miniguns promised swift justice from above, and its flares made an artificial day out of even the darkest of nights. This airborne guardian typically reigned supreme, its maneuvers cloaked in the night, rendering it nearly invincible. Yet, an unexpected trial emerged on the night of February 24, 1969. Hovering above Long Binh Army Post, Spooky 71 encountered catastrophe when a mortar round tore through the aircraft, knocking out the crew in the back and injuring them with pieces of shrapnel. When Airman First Class John Levitow, the loadmaster, woke up, he immediately helped a wounded airman away from the doorway when he noticed a small cloud of smoke. Just then, he noticed the real threat. The smoke came from an active magnesium Mark 24 flare, powerful 27-pound metal canisters that would burn at 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit to light up the night with a 2 million candle power intensity. Loadmaster Levitow then watched in horror as the flaming ticking time bomb bounced around the cabin, threatening to ignite over 20,000 rounds of minigun ammunition all at once. The AC-47 Spooky began its career decades earlier when it was simply known as the Douglas C-47 Skytrain cargo plane, the most beloved Allied transport of World War II. Produced in the thousands, the type was used for nearly everything. From transporting cargo to ferrying paratroopers toward their drop zones, the iconic Skytrain saw service in some of the conflict's most important encounters, from D-Day to Operation Market Garden. But while the C-47 performed excellently throughout the war, soldiering on in the most complex conflict in human history due to its simplicity, ruggedness, and ability to successfully operate from even the most rudimentary airstrips, rapidly advancing technology rendered the aircraft obsolete in the immediate post-war period. However, the newly formed United States Air Force would recognize these attributes years later. The gunship concept was conceived during World War II by Lieutenant Gilmore MacDonald for U-boat attacks. He envisioned an aircraft equipped with the same side-firing guns that continuously engaged in a technique known as a pylon turn. While the notion was turned down time and time again, nearly 20 years later, in 1963, amid the Vietnam War, it gained traction again when Air Force Captain John Simons saw its potential for counter-guerrilla operations. Despite the skepticism, General Curtis LeMay greenlighted the testing of modified AC-47 gunships in Vietnam. The decades-old model of the cargo ship could hold a tremendous amount of munition, and being propeller-driven, it would allow for precise maneuvers. Early prototypes of the modified aircraft were finished in late 1964. While initially designated FC-47D for fighter cargo, the service changed it to AC-47D for attack cargo after fighter pilots complained. This new model shared nearly the same characteristics as a standard model, with a wingspan of 95 feet, a length of 64 feet, and almost 17 feet high. But what set the AC-47 apart was its trio of M134 7.62mm multi-barreled miniguns, all positioned on the left side, allowing 3,000 rounds a minute at a single target. The AC-47 carried over 20,000 rounds to feed these fast-firing arms on an ordinary mission. To complement this, the aircraft had a loiter time of around 7 hours, allowing it to remain flying over a target area for extended periods. Because many Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army attacks usually occurred at night, the aircraft carried between 25 and 56 flares to illuminate targets, depending on the mission, deployed by a crewman hand-dropping them out the door when the pilot gave the green light. While this new iteration of the C-47 carried the same 1930s-era avionics and systems, the simplicity of these was proven and reliable, and by mid-December, the model was ready for testing missions. On the night of December 23, 1964, the American defenders in and around several Republic of Vietnam outposts in the Mekong River were feeling less than festive. Throughout the night, what began as harassment quickly turned into countless night attacks by the Communist Viet Cong guerrillas. Pressing for help, the defenders at one of the strongholds radioed for fire support. Less than an hour later, the Americans heard the sound of a couple of radial engines in the sky. As flares dropped from the aircraft, instead of leaving, suddenly and without warning, thousands of .30 caliber machine gun rounds began raining from above and upon the enemy. The roaring of the guns stopped every few seconds, only to return from another direction just as powerful. Recalling that first mission, one former crew member remembered, quote, "We opened fire, and it scared me half to death. I thought the guns had blown up. It was really noisy too, with the din from all 3 guns going simultaneously. Faced with this devastating new weapon, the Viet Cong withdrew. The new plane fired 4,500 rounds and repeated a similar incursion only 20 minutes later farther south to relieve another besieged garrison, once again driving the enemy off. In its very first testing mission, the AC-47 had just proven the aerial fixed-wing gunship concept as a close air support weapon. With this, even before the testing period ended, United States Air Force Commander of Air Operations in Vietnam, General Joseph Moore, requested an entire squadron of the roaring gunships. By the end of the year, only a week later, the modified C-47s had flown 16 night combat missions, firing nearly 180,000 rounds. After combat tests continued throughout the first quarter of 1965 with overwhelmingly positive results, in May, the Air Force officially adopted the C-47 gunship as the service's first fixed-wing gunship, ending decades of debate. This new model was not fully deployed in squadrons when it had already garnered a reputation and a nickname with the American forces. That same spring, during a night mission, a Stars and Stripes reporter witnessed the AC-47 in action and likened the image of the plane's tracer rounds to dragon's breath, enhanced by the endless roar of the guns echoing from its open door and toward the enemy. Upon reading this depiction, a top brass officer named the aircraft Puff the Magic Dragon from the popular song of the era. By November, 20 more unused C-47s were refurbished as gunships and officially assigned to the 4th Air Commando Squadron, or ACS, which began flying regular missions. Overall, the AC-47s were a great performer in the unforgiving Vietnam skies, inflicting heavy casualties and losing few in the process. The VC also knew of this mighty beast and captured documents fiercely, stating that they should not attack it since weapons were useless against it and would only infuriate the Dragon further. Shortly after the 4th ACS began developing its aircraft, a new nickname emerged, Spooky, a moniker born either from a call-sign assignment conversation overheard by fighter pilots or from its distinctive night missions and unique camouflage. By the beginning of 1966, with its effectiveness and versatility now undeniable, Spooky was cutting its teeth on a wide front, suppressing enemy fire, attacking naval targets, and expanding operations into Thailand and Laos. The year also marked the formation of additional squadrons and an increase in the fleet to 53 aircraft by 1967. On June 27, 1967, the AC-47 flew their 1,000th Fort Defense mission. In that year alone, the gunships flew over 1,500 sorties, losing only 5 aircraft to ground fire and crashes and 1 to a mysterious disappearance. The Tet Offensive in 1968, a significant enemy campaign, pushed the AC-47s back to more traditional roles of defense and enemy interdiction, highlighting their flexibility and enduring value in combat situations. By then, the success of this concept had led to the development of more gunship airframes using newer aircraft, like the AC-119 and AC-130, which were more powerful, sophisticated, and survivable than the relatively slow AC-47. As new gunship models like the AC-130 began to arrive, the AC-47's direct involvement in combat was beginning to be phased out in early 1969. But Puff the Magic Dragon still had one ace up its sleeve, a Medal of Honor. On the night of February 24, 1969, a Douglas AC-47 Spooky 71 patrolled the skies in the vicinity of Tan Son Nhut Air Base near Saigon. Aboard it was Airman First Class John Levitow, serving as the Spooky's loadmaster. As the one responsible for managing the aircraft's weaponry and handling and dropping the illumination flares from the plane, Loadmaster Levitow knew that the Mark 24 flares were serious business. These 27-pound magnesium flares had the intensity of 2 million candle power, reached temperatures up to 4,000 degrees, and could even burn through metal. After hours of patrolling, the Spooky's pilot, Major Kenneth Carpenter, suddenly spotted muzzle flashes outside Long Binh Post, a major U.S. Army base and logistical hub. Knowing full well it was under attack, the pilot threw the aircraft, along with its 8-man crew, into a bank turn to engage directly with the Viet Cong. Upon the command of his pilot, Levitow and the gunner began dropping flares through the open cargo door to illuminate and support the ground forces repelling the assault below. Just as Airman First Class Levitow finished preparing a flare, setting its timers, and passing it to the gunner, Airman Ellis Owen, a North Vietnamese Army 82mm mortar shell hit the right wing and rocked the entire aircraft. As the shell exploded inside the structure, it filled the fuselage with flying shrapnel, and the blast wounded everyone in the back of the aircraft, including Levitow. Recalling the incident, he said, quote, "It felt like a 2x4 or a large piece of wood which had been struck against my side. It stung me. I really didn't know what it was." The blast rocked the Spooky so hard that the gunner unknowingly pulled the safety ring, arming the flare, which was now rolling loose on the floor, near ammunition cans that contained 19,000 rounds of live ammunition. At first, however, Levitow focused on a wounded crew member lying next to an open cargo door. Despite having more than 40 wounds in his back and legs, the loadmaster inched towards his comrade and dragged the man to safety. With him out of the way, he saw the armed flare. He knew he had no time to lose. But despite Levitow trying to grab it, the damaged aircraft kept pitching back and forth, and the flare rolled away from him time and time again. Still, determined to save the lives of everyone on board, through a haze of pain, shock, and fear, and fighting the aircraft's 30-degree bank angle, the severely injured Levitow crawled toward the flare, and in a split second, threw himself upon it. Holding it close to his wounded torso, Levitow wriggled toward the rear of the cabin and pushed it through the open cargo door before collapsing. Only a moment later, the flare ignited in the iconic combination of red light and powerful smoke. The crew aboard Spooky 71 was safe. Somehow, Ken Carpenter managed to fly the AC-47 back to base, where, upon inspection, it was determined that Spooky 71 had over 3,500 holes in the wings and fuselage. The pilot was able to reconstruct what happened that night by the blood trail left by Levitow, stating, quote, "I've never seen such a courageous act performed under such adverse circumstances." While Levitow was initially humble about his feat, saying it was just a conditioned response, and that anyone with common sense would have done it, his fellow airmen disagreed. On May 14, 1970, Armed Forces Day, Airman First Class John Levitow was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Nixon, making him the lowest-ranking member of the Air Force to be awarded this honor. According to Secretary of the Air Force Whit Peters, quote, "Levitow served during a war in which heroic acts were commonplace, but by any standard, his courage that night was extraordinary. His selfless actions saved not only his own life, but the lives of 7 others. He has been an inspiration to all of our airmen." By then, the AC-47s were beginning to show extreme wear and tear. When it was no longer practical to keep rebuilding and maintaining the models, especially as more sophisticated gunships began arriving in Vietnam, the Spooky was transitioned out of mainstream use with the Army. The last American-flown AC-47 Puff the Magic Dragon mission over Vietnam happened in December 1969. By then, the Spooky and its crews had defended over 4,000 outposts and bases, and the still-standing models were transferred to the South Vietnamese and Royal Laotian Air Forces.